So, and today's event would be Get Into It, which is a GitHub workshop, which will be hosted by one of our special guests from GitHub, which is Kedasha. And before we start, there are a few housekeeping rules to follow, which is please be respectful to everyone and feel free to use the Q&A tab to ask any questions. And our special guest is Kedasha Kerr, a developer advocate and content creator at GitHub. So without further ado, I would like to pass it to Kedasha. So Kedasha, could you introduce yourself and you could share your screen and talk about GitHub?
Yeah, sure, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Kedasha, and I am a developer advocate at GitHub, and super stoked to be here today. I said stoked. Super excited to be here today to talk about Git and version control and GitHub, and just do a little bitty workshop with you all. Let me share my screen, and we will get right into it. A lot of options. Hold on. Let me just share my entire screen. There we go. Cool. Is that good? Can you see my slides? Oh, I can't see the chat, so if somebody could come off mute, that would be great.
All right.
Cool. So welcome to Intro to Version Control and Git, or Get Into It, yeah. I was going to play the song, but then I was just like, that may be a bit too much, especially with it being recorded and going to be uploaded on YouTube. Didn't want any type of copyright troubles there. But today's agenda is I'm going to do a small intro about who I am. We're going to jump right into what is version control, what is Git versus GitHub, and whether or not they're the same thing. How to configure Git for the first time, core Git concepts every new developer must know for their first job. So I know in college, a lot of times there isn't a lot of practical experience. It's a lot of theory, but Git is one of those concepts that we have to know as developers because it's a part of our everyday lives. We're going to take a little look at GitHub, and then we're going to do a small activity on working with Git on a pseudo team. So I have a repository, and then we're going to just do a small exercise on practicing our Git commits, and then we're just going to wrap it up. So I'm Kedasha, like I said earlier, and I'm a developer advocate at GitHub. Prior to the GitHub, I worked as a software engineer on the front end of the applications for 2 years. And then I started to create technical content online in 2020. And I love it. I'm extremely addicted to TikTok. I'm on TikTok most days for like a very long time. And I truly have a deep passion for educating marginalized communities and to teach them how to use tech to improve their lives. You can follow me on socials. I'm on Insta, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Twitter, though I hardly use Twitter. And isn't Twitter kind of crumbling? But that's besides the point. But yeah, you can find me on socials at it's.ladydev everywhere. And that's a bit about me. So to get into today's matter, what is version control? So version control, when it comes right down to it, it's a system that tracks changes to files over a period of time. In a developer team, it's the practice of tracking and managing changes to source code. So version control is pretty much there to ensure that we don't overwrite the code that's in the production environment. It's there to make sure that developers can work on a repository, which is a Git term, to make sure that developers can work on files on their machine without interrupting the current code that's in the production environment that clients see. By using version control software, developers are able to implement new features for the same project at the same time. So I can be, let's say I'm in the document directory on my computer, and you can be in the same directory on your computer because of version control, and like we'll have like different local copies of the same directory because of version control. And so Git is the most widely used version control system in the world. Most companies use Git as their version control system because it allows each developer on the team to work independently on the same project. To use Git, we need access to a repository, but first we need to download it from the official website. It's available for Mac, Windows, and Linux operating system. Has anyone here used Git before? Or do you use Git in your classes or anything? Let me actually put this on my second monitor over here so I can take a look. Yes, awesome. Eugene, yes, that's great. Cool. Yeah, so Git is pretty great because, like, you know, it's like when you're working on your resume. I got this example from Roselle, who's a developer advocate on my team. You're working on your resume and you have so many different versions of the resume. Resume for GitHub, resume for Microsoft, resume for Twitch. And it's just like, that's kind of what Git does. Instead of us manually having to keep track of every changes that we have in our code, Git kind of keeps track of that for us, depending on what we commit or tell it to keep track of. So Git and GitHub, they are not the same thing. So Git is a version control system for tracking file changes, and GitHub is a web-based platform for developers to store code in the cloud. And GitHub is a lot more than just a place to store code in the cloud, but for the sake of today's conversation, that's how we're going to describe GitHub. So Git and GitHub can work together. So in order to use Git, you do need access to a repository, and that's kind of where GitHub comes in. So with GitHub, you can use Git to push your changes, to track your changes, and keep track of all the things. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. So configuring Git for the first time can sometimes be a little difficult. We won't be going through our today. What just happened? Sorry about that. We won't be going through this in our terminals today, but to configure Git for the first time, we want to set our identity. We want to set up our editor or preferred code editor. I love using VS Code. We want to set up our default branch. Recently, branches have been changed to be main instead of master. And we also want to check our settings to make sure that everything we just implemented is set. And so that Git, it's pretty much to make sure that Git knows who we are, so that whenever we make a commit, it says like Kedasha Kerr made this commit at this time, and here's the message. Git concepts, every new developer must know. So these are some pretty basic concepts in regards to Git that is very important to know for your first role. So a repository, which is, you know, that remote file system that has that houses the source code for a production for like a company, right? It's the code for the company. So let's say we're currently using Gmail's what is this called, like a Zoomish thing. So they have a repository that houses the code that manages how Gmail works. We have branching, which is whenever we are working in a repository, each person on the team can have their own branch, and then they will merge into the main version of that branch, all the changes, to make sure that the main branch is not what is the word? My words are slipping me today. I'm so sorry. To make sure that the main branch is protected and everything isn't changed and things aren't changed the way they're not supposed to. Then there is pulling, which is pretty much whenever we clone a repository to our machine. Cloning is pretty much copying that repository to your local machine. You can pull in changes from the remote branch into your local copy of that branch. Pushing is pushing your local changes to the remote copy of that branch and then having it reviewed by somebody on your team and then having that merged into the main branch. Committing is the practice of keeping track of your changes as you go. So it's very important to write a message whenever you make a massive or a significant change to a repository. That way Git can keep track of the files that you are working on, and Git can keep track of the incremental changes that you're making to a repository. Merging is the practice of taking your changes and the current changes in the main branch and putting them together. Let's say you need 3 pages on a website. You currently have 2 pages, and you're working on the last page. You would submit something called a pull request to GitHub or something like GitHub, and then you would say, hey, can you review this? The person would review it, approve it, and then you would merge your 3rd page into the main branch that houses the other 2 pages, and then you have all 3 pages on the website. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if it doesn't. And then you also have your development environment. And so your development environment is made up of your working directory, your staging area, and your local repository. The working directory is like, okay, where is the repository housed? Like, where did you copy the repository to? That could be like in a folder like documents. That could be in a folder like repositories on your computer. The staging area is where your commits go. So whenever you make a change to a file, and we're going to go over this today in our like little activity later, whenever you make a changes to a file and Git says, yep, I have it, the staging area is where Git houses those changes, and it keeps track of them until you commit those changes to the repository. The local repository is just the repository, your local copy of the remote repository on your machine. Rebasing is a pretty complex Git concept, but when you start working at a company, it's going to be like your best friend, and it's going to give you so many headaches because rebasing can be so difficult to do sometimes. But it's pretty much pulling remote changes into your local branch and resolving merge conflicts and making sure that everything is good to go and up to snuff. That's the best way I can describe that. We won't be going over rebasing today, but you can definitely take a course that GitHub has to learn more about rebasing. So what is GitHub? GitHub is a platform that allows developers to store their code in the cloud. To use Git, you need access to a repository, like I said earlier, and this is where GitHub comes in. So with GitHub, you can use Git to push your code from your local machine to a remote repository in the cloud, and GitHub makes it super easy to collaborate on a single project with multiple developers. So a lot of companies own repositories on GitHub, and that's how developers on the team that work at those companies work on, the companies and push changes and maintain the repos. That's pretty much your job when you, as a software engineer, it's to maintain the repositories, update the repositories, add features to the repositories, and you do all of that on GitHub or a platform similar to GitHub, and you just work together collaboratively and cross-functionally using Git. So a little look at GitHub. How many of you have a GitHub profile already? Sweet. Awesome. Yeah, a GitHub profile is very important because as I know, like GitHub recruiters specifically look at your GitHub profile to see what type of contributions you're doing. Though don't make contributions fool you. See, like I only had 147 contributions this year, but trust, I've been working. Don't worry about that. So this is what the GitHub profile looks like. There's an overview page. You have the repositories page. Projects, which is relatively new. So GitHub Project is a project management solution for developers. Very simple to use, and it's a lot less complicated than the other ones out there. We have GitHub Packages, which is made to house your Docker images. So you can store your Docker images on GitHub right next to your repo. No need to go externally to like the Docker page and such. You have the stars section as well, which is pretty much a list of all the repos that you've starred on GitHub. So GitHub does have this community feature where you can see what your friends are working on, and if you like it, you can star it. Somebody will link to their repository. If you like it and you want to go back to it, you can star it, and then you go to the stars tab to see all the things. And you can also update your profile with a little README section, which is very great because if a recruiter goes to your GitHub and they see that thing, they can see, oh, you know this language, you know this language. Mine isn't like that because I don't need to do that right now, but that's a great way to showcase your skills on GitHub. You can pin different repositories on GitHub, and that's pretty much what the profile is. This is what a repository looks like on GitHub. So a repository, remember, is the remote location. It's pretty much the end-all be-all of the source code. That's where it's housed, and that's where you'll work from. You will click this little code button on GitHub, this green code button. And there's a link that's there that you can plop into your terminal to clone the repository onto your machine. Or you can use code spaces, which makes it a lot easier. And then this is what a pull request would look like on GitHub, and you can see how you can see the commits or changes that you've made to your branch or to your, the file. And that's pretty much how Git and GitHub interact with each other. GitHub is where the code goes to live, and Git is what we use to track the changes that we make to that code. So let's do a little activity. And I call this working with Git on a team. But it's not really a team. It's just like we're going to all work from one single repository. So I created a repository this morning called Intro to Git. And what we're going to do is we're going to open this up in code spaces. We're going to create a new branch. We're pretty much going to go through the entire Git flow, and I'll do that with you. So this is the link to the repo. I'll pop it in the chat. And if you don't have Git installed on your local machine, don't worry about it. We don't need to do that right now. This is why Codespaces is so great, because Git is automatically built into the development environment that Codespaces builds for us. Cool. So if you're here, I'm just gonna wait for a little bit. I'm gonna wait for like 2 more minutes. Pretend that I'm singing the song. Get into it, yeah. I'm kidding. Let me know if you're here by just like saying thumbs up in the chat or something, just so I know that I'm not like rushing through. So what we're about to do is we're about to practice some basic Git commands like git status, git log, git commit, git push, git amend. Maybe if I make a mistake, I make a lot of typing errors a lot of times. So git amend, and yeah, just to see what it's like working with Git on GitHub. Cool, so let's go. So if you're on this page, click the code button here and go to the Code Spaces tab. Then we're going to click Create Code Space on main. And that's going to spin up a development environment for us. And so code spaces look a lot like VS Code, which I love because I'm so used to using VS Code. But this is pretty much a development environment in the cloud. It's not using any of our machine's resources. It's like spinning up everything for us. It's pretty cool. So we could spin up a code space on like an iPad, which doesn't have a lot of like gigs. You could spin up a code spaces on like very like low level machines and it would work perfectly. Cool. So this is a pretty basic repo. There are some actions here and it's just the README. So what I want us to do is to first create a branch. So to create a branch using Git, we do git checkout -b for branch, and then we do the branch name. So I want you to name your branch last name -intro. So your last name -intro. So for me, that would be Kerr -intro. Let me change it because I did a practice thing today. And now we're on a new branch. And so because we've all checked out, hopefully, to a new branch, do I need to zoom in more on this? Can you see it? How do I zoom in using this? How do I zoom in using Google?
Or if you want, you could just like share the terminal screen. Oh.
How to make bigger? Don't know.
Do you want to try like Control+?
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. It's not going. There we go. Is that better? Can you see it? Should I make it a little bigger?
I think that's good.
Cool. Okay, great. So hopefully we've all checked out to a new branch. And because we've all checked out to a new branch, this is how we're all going to be able to work on the repository at the same time and make different changes to the repo or even the same changes to the repository at the same time without having any conflicts, hopefully. There are merge conflicts and they can be a pain to solve sometime, but hopefully none of that happens today. So check out to a new branch and let's create a new file. And I want you to call this file last name -intro.md for Markdown. Cool. We have the new file here. And so what I want us to do right now is to create a commit. So because we just made a new file, that to me in this case, on this very simple repository, is a significant change. And so we want to stop in our workflow and we want to add this file to our staging area. So to do that, we do git add, and then we want to add through the file name. So it's kerk-intro.md. And if we do git status, we'll see that a new file was added to the staging area. And then to actually commit this file to the staging area, we're going to do git commit -m added intro file. Whenever you're writing commit messages, you want to make sure that they are descriptive in nature, so they tell a story. When you're on a dev team, it's important for your team to follow the history of the work that you're doing. And so having descriptive commit messages, very important. And cool, if we do git status again, you'll see that there is nothing to commit and the working tree is clean. So let's make some changes to this intro file. Doesn't have to be anything like crazy. This is just a practice git. Let's say, hi, I am Kedasha. I am learning how to use Git. And just add like a dancing emoji. This is my favorite emoji. It travels with me. And so let's do another commit. Let's first run git status. And when we run git status, we see that Git is keeping track of the changes that we're making, but it's currently not in the staging environment. So we see that we modified the kerr-k-intro.md file. And so now we need to do git add file to update what will be committed. So let's do that, just like before. Git add kerr-k-intro.md, enter. So we'll see that this was added and it's ready to be committed. It's added to the staging environment. You'll know if something is in the staging environment because Git automatically adds different colors. So this is green, it's added. This is red, modified but not added. So now let's do a commit message. Git commit -m update intro file. And I put in row. That's wonderful. So let's use git commit --amend to change this from in row to intro. So if you ever make a mistake with your commit messages, you can always change it with git commit --amend command. Enter. Change the R. Oh, I just needed to add the T. Know how to spell, I promise. And there we go. If we do git log, we can see a log or a list of all the changes we've made to this repository today. So I added the intro file. I updated the intro file. And now it says intro and not in row like before. And yeah. And it says, I'm the author, this is the date and the time. So if somebody makes a mistake, you can definitely know who on your team did the thing that broke production. To exit Vim, this is like the Vim environment, just hit Q and we're out. And I think that's it. So I'm not going to add anything more to this. You can add more to the file if you want. New fear unlocked. Yeah, Elaine. There is an extension in VS Code called, I forgot what it's called, but it's Git Blame. It's called Git Blame. And it's pretty much for you to see who did what when. And you can go directly to them and say, hey, I noticed you added this code last week. Can you please explain it to me because it broke production? Like, what were you thinking kind of thing? But yeah, it happens a lot on Teams. And I love the Git Blame extension because it tells me who to go to if I have questions. Kindly have questions. Okay. So now that we've done that, so what have we done? We have created a new file, we committed it, we added to the staging environment, we updated the staging environment, we used the amend, the git -- amend command to change a commit that had a spelling error. And so now let's use git to push these changes to the repository that we're all working on. I'm thinking of creating a code space from our repository. How do you create a code space? Is it free? Oh, good question. So yes, all developers get 60 hours of code spaces for free every month. And to create a code space, if you currently have a repository, that green button that we used today to create this code space, you can just click the drop-down arrow and hit create code space on main. And that's how you create a code space. It's pretty cool because it's in the cloud. Because initially for this workshop, I was going to have us download Git and have it on our machines and work in VS Code locally. But then, you know, a lot of times in workshops and talks, there are a lot of errors that you have to debug, and then it becomes a debugging session. And so code spaces allowed me to like not having to think about debugging and going through all that headache. So let's now push our changes to the remote repository by doing git push origin and then the branch name. And so the branch name is going to be the branch that you created from in the beginning here. So my branch name is Kerr intro. You can see it on the left-hand side as well. And hit enter and cross your fingers that it works, you know, because sometimes it doesn't work. It's just like, what? But it worked. And so we can go straight to the repo. And we see a message here that says, you have recent changes. Would you like to create a pull request? And so you do here, compare and pull request. It generated a title for us, and we can see the changes here. Not a lot of changes, but if you had a lot of changes, it would show all those changes here. And just leaving a little description, adding the intro file as requested. I don't know, something like that. What I would typically do on a team is I would link the ticket number in the description, and I would explain what I did in the code change. Okay, and now we create the PR, and then it starts doing its thing. And so the main branch is protected, so you're not able to merge your changes into the main branch. But you will see a nice little greeting from my friend, Actions, that says, congrats on creating your first PR. Hopefully you're getting used to Git as you go. So here are the commit messages that we made. And with GitHub, we can see them nicely ordered. And these are the SHAs, or the commit details, or, you know, that long thing that we saw here when we did git log, the ID. So GitHub also keeps track of the ID of the commits. We can go into each individual commit to see what we did when. So for the first commit, this is what we did. And then, well, this is the second one. And then for the first commit, we just created a file, and so it's empty. So we can see exactly what we did when we did it based on the commit messages and when we committed it. If there are any checks or action workflows or CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous development, or just security checks or tests running on your repository, you'll see them come up here on GitHub. And then you can also see a detail of the files that were changed. We only added one file, so we only changed one file, which is why only one file is here. And so what we would do now is we would grab the link to this pull request, copy it, and plop it into the chat for our team and say, hey, I just did this thing. Can you please take a look at it and let me know if any changes is needed or approve it? Once it's approved, then you can merge it into the main branch and move on to the next ticket because the work never stops, you know? But that's pretty much what the Git flow is, and that's how you work with Git on a team. You would clone the repository to your local machine, or you can open it up in Codespaces if your team is using Codespaces. You would use Git to keep track of your changes. Oh, I see we have Ty's intro. You would use Git to keep track of your changes, and you would use Git to push your changes to GitHub or a platform similar to GitHub. And that's how you work on a team with Git. It's pretty great. Do you have any questions? Cool beans. And so if you want to download Git, you would go to this lovely page here. And also, this page is filled with a lot of good information. The documentation page have a reference guide. There is a cheat sheet, which I did link to the file or what am I trying to say? I did link it in the slides. You can get a copy of the slides as well. They have a Get Going with Git little video series that teaches you Git basics if you want to learn more about Git. But Git is one of those tools or technology that you need to know. It can be a bit annoying to work with sometimes, but it's very, very valuable and it's very good to know. That's our workshop for today, folks. So there is a Git cheat sheet available on that website. That's what I was just trying to find. It lists the most common Git commands that you would need to know here. So you can go and download this if you want and save it. When I was just learning Git, I had this printed out and just like stuck on my wall when I started working, and it came in very handy. There is also GitHub Skills, which is a resource for you to learn how to use GitHub and also how to use Git. So for example, this repository, Introduction to GitHub, it not only covers GitHub, but it also covers Git and the Git workflow, because to use GitHub, you need to use Git. So it kind of intertwines. So on this repository here, you'll learn how to create a branch, commit a file, open a pull request, and merge your pull request. Kind of what we just did, but you can do it in your own time and kind of allow the information to absorb in your brain a bit more. And that is GitHub Skills. There's also a course on how to resolve merge conflicts, a course on release-based workflow, reviewing pull requests, connecting the dots, like connecting everything together, commits, projects, all the good stuff. You can learn about GitHub Actions, CI/CD, publishing packages. This is a pretty great site for beginners to use to GitHub. Yeah. So thank you. And you can scan this QR code for the slides if you want. And thank you for having me. I hope you learned something new today.
All right. Thank you very much, Kedasha. And thank you for coming and give us this talk for everyone. And we really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Anytime. Thanks for asking. Now I have an intro to Git and GitHub talk that I didn't have before.
Yeah. and I think that's all. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. And if there isn't any question, I think we can end today's session. And thank you very much, Kedasha. Thanks again.
Thanks. Bye. Happy
Bye.
holidays.